when I spoke to, accomplished musicians and, quite well-known artists that have put together bands and people around them in the creative worlds and made a living from it. And people, I'm talking about people further in their careers, like 40s, 50 years old type thing. The one thing that everyone sort of agreed on but didn't really want to say it out loud was tribe matters almost more than talent. And I think you see that in the punk movements. You saw it in the indie movement. Tribe is something that you can't really describe or put your finger on, but we all agree is just, I'm either part of this tribe or that tribe, and it's something you feel. And so when we were saying, okay, so the world needs this sort of social professional network for the music sphere, not just drummers and guitarists, but everyone connected to the world of music. We were like, well, resumes don't really matter, because you can be extraordinarily talented and have achieved on paper very little. And vice versa, you can achieve a lot on paper and not be all that special. But we kind of felt that resumes weren't going to be the answer. Of course, the logical thing is, well, every time you see a profile, why don't you automatically hear 15 seconds of the song?
Hi, welcome to the show. If this is your first time here or you are a returning listener or viewer and you haven't done so yet, hit the like and subscribe button down below. Be much appreciated. And of course, if you're very intrigued with regards to what's happening in the startup scene, definitely hit that like and subscribe button down below, and hope you look forward to the show. So to kick things off, I'd just like to give you the floor, introduce yourself and let the people know who you are.
Yeah. So firstly, thanks for having me. And my name is Josh. I run a company called Vinyl Group, which is a global music tech business with a Australian publishing and media arm. And so in summary, sort of equal parts, I suppose, fan to artist tools through some of our media publications like Rolling Stone and Music Network and Tone Deaf, which the latter of those sites are sort of quite important to the Australian music ecosystem. And then you've got musician to fan tools, which is more on the tech side of the business. So that's like Vampr, Serenade, and vinyl.com, which is an e-commerce store for new vinyl records, and hopefully more products coming soon. So that's in a nutshell what we do.
Yeah, so I want to kind of take us back a little bit to your roots in music. And you kind of grew up around music and you had the opportunity to learn the business of music at an early age. How did that early education in music and the business of music kind of shape your journey as a creative and shape your journey later on as an entrepreneur?
I think the early exposure I had to the business of music was less about learning and more intoxicating. It was, it got me excited about joining the industry and playing an important role on that executive side of things. I saw the power of being able to make careers and help people get their art out to other people en masse, and how transformative that could be in a very different market and very different time. So we're talking about a lot less artists, obviously, because it was more expensive to do anything and everything when it comes to making music and distributing it and getting it out there and collecting royalties. So very different time, but kind of I suppose what was being achieved back then was not dissimilar to what we do now at scale with technology, which is really just help folks get their music out there and hopefully make some money off doing the thing that they love, which is what I'm passionate about enabling.
And that enabling thing, it's the frustration that you had when you moved to London to kind of expand your band within the space and you couldn't connect with people within the London ecosystem. What frustration within that space led you to start with your first startup?
I think it wasn't until when you've had a little bit of success, like I had a little bit of success in the early years of being an artist, and then it's not, I was about to say taken away from me, but it wasn't taken away from me. It's just, then when I did go to London, I was in a different market and I didn't have access to the same managers, the same promoters, the same publicists, and also no fan base. What I at least learned from that, and I think a lot of folks learn this lesson in other ways, is you take for granted the main experience you're building up in your formative years. So even just being a young teenager in a city that has a music scene, going to shows, playing small shows yourself, you're actually building up a network, you're building up an identity inside of a community, and that has a value. And so then when you go transplant yourself into another city and you have to start from scratch, you're like, oh, I probably didn't ascribe enough value to the almost like the social capital that you built up by just simply existing in a space. And and the value that has and how that can actually help fast track things and make things happen for you as a creative. And so trying to recreate that really quickly anywhere in the world was something that felt to me inherently that technology could help solve. And so my challenge I set for myself before we made Vampr was like, it's a lofty goal because there's already a million tools out there to do the distribution thing and the publishing thing and lots of it, and building fan base even. But there wasn't really tools to build network. And so that was the thing that really became an obsession, frankly, and still is. If you look at everything that I've ever done, at the heart of it is really connecting people. And it's, I think I must be obsessed with that for some reason, but it's surely a positive thing to bring into the world because great things happen when people connect.
This is true. And I want to touch on your product design as well. It kind of far removed the notion of apps like Tinder, where it's resume based. You kind of went the route of visual outlook, where is that a more of an artist feel, where as an artist you want to feel what the other person sounds like before you engage with them? Or what was that the thinking behind building the app?
Yeah. It came from artists in Melbourne, Australia, which is where we are. When you're trying to put a band together in the 90s and the 2000s, there was a website called Melband, and it's like a forum, and like Craigslist in America. And you put up, looking for a drummer who likes Pink Floyd and can hold a groove together for more than 2 minutes, and you put in what you need. And then what happens is you hire a rehearsal studio, and then people that you've never seen or never had any sense of what they're all about would turn up. And you might be making inoffensive indie rock music like me, and then a guy with a mohawk turns up, and it's like, they might be a lovely dude, but they're not in the same tribe, and they're not going to fit in my band. And that might sound like silly, and I kind of said it a bit tongue in cheek, but when I spoke to, accomplished musicians and, quite well-known artists that have put together bands and people around them in the creative worlds and made a living from it. And people, I'm talking about people further in their careers, like 40s, 50 years old type thing. The one thing that everyone sort of agreed on but didn't really want to say it out loud was tribe matters almost more than talent. And I think you see that in the punk movements. You saw it in the indie movement. Tribe is something that you can't really describe or put your finger on, but we all agree is just, I'm either part of this tribe or that tribe, and it's something you feel. And so when we were saying, okay, so the world needs this sort of social professional network for the music sphere, not just drummers and guitarists, but everyone connected to the world of music. We were like, well, resumes don't really matter because you can be extraordinarily talented and have achieved on paper very little, and vice versa. You can achieve a lot on paper and not be all that special. But we kind of felt that resumes weren't going to be the answer. Of course, the logical thing is, well, every time you see a profile, why don't you automatically hear 15 seconds of the song? But, the reality is people use their apps on train rides from their home to work or in bed at night when a significant other is trying to get to sleep. And we thought of all the circumstances where people use mobile phones the most, and sound was actually a real barrier and something that was a bit annoying, frankly. And so we didn't want to make it music. For a music app, music actually needed to come as an optional part of it. And then there's licensing issues you've got to contend with as well when it comes to allowing people to upload snippets and things like that. So there's a whole lot of reasons why we went down the tribe path. But when you sort of come back to that sort of initial thing of the audition in the band room where a whole bunch of strangers come and you have to sort of audition people blindly, we felt like, well, we can actually solve that problem from day one on this app, which is show people visually what they sort of look like. And it's not a dating app, and it's certainly not even a looks thing, but there is that sort of sense of, if I'm trying to put together, a hardcore rock band, I probably don't want, someone who might projects an image or an aesthetic that's just completely antithetical to that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's just something that you should be able to, it's a part of the assessment. We just call it the assessment criteria. And so you'd pass on that politely. And the main algorithmic tool, because there's various algorithmic tools that we have at our disposal to make good matches for folks, but the main one that we lean into is artists in common. So if you listen to the same 20 artists that I do, and you fit into any of my other categories and I might be looking for, like I said, I was looking for a singer and you're a singer, you would show up for me.
Yeah, nice. And how did the garage phase of this thing look like? Because now you have the product, you have the idea of what you want. How did the building phase look like?
Well, the first 1,000 users was as hard as everyone said it was going to be. We treated it more like a tech business and than, say, just a music product, which meant going down tech routes like Product Hunt and Silicon Beach Fest and a whole bunch of like things that you do if you're launching a tech product versus going on music messaging boards and doing it sort of through the musician community. That was a choice. I don't know if it was good or bad. All I know is it took about a year for us to push everything uphill until it got to a place where a few things started to click and we were confident spending money on advertising and scaling it pretty quickly. So I'll never forget that first year. I talk about it a lot. I reflect back on it a lot because I learned so many things from it and we moved so quickly. And I don't think we would have ever... So when I look around and look at the competition, a lot of apps and platforms that try to compete with what we do get stuck at around the 50,000 person mark. And then there's other ceilings, 100,000 people, 1 million people. And all of these ceilings exist for usually reasons to do with unit economics. But in the earlier stages, quite simply, no one wants to turn up to an empty party. So you need a platform that feels full. And getting past or getting through that challenge, especially with a global platform, and a geo-social network at that, where you can go to any city in the world and see how many users are on the platform. We just had to by hook or crook make it work, and that's where my work ethic probably played a healthy role in getting things going. But we did what everyone has to do who launches successful social platforms. We hit up people on Craigslist and said, here's the answer to your problem. We went to the people who were looking for the solution. So we just went to our customer, and that meant finding where they lived online and then letting them know that we existed, and then hopefully having a decent onboarding experience. And then once they arrive, having enough people to satisfy their interest. That's why I say the first year was a bit of a grind because we got quite good at onboarding new folks, but then often there weren't many people in the city that they were in. And so we had to kind of reach out to them and let them know that they were in the first 100 and how exciting that is. That's just part of starting a new platform. It's not fun. And when people say, would you do it all again? Probably not.
It's always like the grind, the time that you put in. It kind of gets exhausting sometimes. And how do you deal with that grind, that mental strain of starting this thing? It's growing now. As a founder, how did you deal with it?
Probably well at times and really poorly at other times. Like we would, when we were up against the wall, like we were low on cash or the traction was slowing down and we weren't able to hit certain milestones that investors had wanted us to hit to open funding doors and blah, blah, blah. We were very good at, in those moments, being quite resourceful. When I say we, I'm talking about my co-founder and I, Barry. We were very good at sort of regrouping, coming up with sort of the vision for the next phase and then building narratives around that and how to present that. And so even if it wasn't always to convince someone else, sometimes you just got to do that for yourself and for your own sanity. So we were very good at keeping going during the hard times. I think if I reflect honestly on when I probably struggled was often immediately after raising capital. And it's not an uncommon story where you're exhausted because you've just been on a 6 month, back-to-back pitching hundreds of people, trying to convince them to back you. You're overwhelmed with emotion because someone's finally backed you, but you're also overwhelmed with cash and probably not the best idea of exactly how you're going to deploy it. You get better with that with age, by the way. Like I know how to spend money now better, but when you're young, you might, got the best plans in the world and say, this is the milestones we need to hit. This is what we want to do over the next 12 months. But after, like I say, a 6 month sprint of raising capital and you're just exhausted, I would struggle during those times. I'd end up having to take some time off to just reflect and sort of take a big breath before putting the head down and getting back into sort of work mode. Because I think that's the hardest part of being a founder is you're flipping operating modality all the time. In 1 minute you're in fundraising mode. Next minute you're in boss mode, putting out problems between staff and you're thinking about culture. Then you're sort of looking after yourself and just making sure that you don't collapse, because if you fall apart, typically in an early stage business, everything does, because it's early stage and there's not enough systems in place, and that's just normal. So there's just so many, and look, that's why it's not for everyone. That's why not everyone should be a founder. But yeah, I don't know. I got through it. I obviously got through it. We're here talking now.
And I want to touch on your launch, and you chose to kind of limit some of the features on the app. Was that a choice in terms of creating scarcity, or was that like, let's see if these features work before we allow more things into the platform?
but a bit of both. It was scarcity was an objective. And then the other thing we were also trying to do was, I said the phrase earlier, no one wants to turn up to an empty party. Yeah. The problem with having too many features and too many different categories in an app that people can sort of check out or sort of put themselves under is people can get lost in categories. So I'll be a bit more specific. In our app, if you say, I'm a guitarist, you'll see people looking for guitarists or other guitarists. But if we created 100,000 categories and you said, I'm a triangle player, you might be on your own. So, especially in the early days. And so we didn't want anyone feeling alone on the platform. And so we restricted the number of categories of who we were letting in to, I think it was 57, something like that, skill types. And we actually did have triangle player in there because that was where the developers would test. So we were all triangle players, and that's how we tested the product to make sure it was working. But we didn't have like unlimited free for all. Like you couldn't sign up and be a music video director, but yet we had hundreds of people wanting that. And then when we got to a certain size, I think it was probably once we crossed maybe the 500,000 user mark, somewhere around that, then we allowed people to create their own categories. But at that point, we were confident that there were enough people that they wouldn't get lost.
And on the monetization strategy that you went on the app with, what was the choices around building that monetization scheme and strategy?
Well, the interesting part of that question is when we first launched in 2016 on iOS as a beta, it was kind of the very tail end of an era in tech where it was like build and they will come, and get scale and work out how to monetize later, that kind of similar ethos. Those are two separate things, but they're kind of related. And then both kind of were falling out of favor pretty quickly, and it shifted from build for other people and make sure you're monetizing from day one. We got caught in that, kind of like how when I was in a band, I got caught in that sort of that switch from CD sales to streaming. Kind of similarly, in technology, I got caught from build a platform and get as many people and work out how to monetize later to a switch to monetize now. So we went through that, and that was an existential change of attitude in the VC world. But we got through it. We had to fundamentally start from scratch, like literally tear down everything we'd done, take away the positives, and then sort of also understand what we probably got quite wrong. Really simple things like we didn't have a nav bar, and we didn't have the way the UI worked on the first version. It wasn't as simple as just build a nav bar. We'll just put a nav bar at the bottom. It would have broken a lot of design rules. And we were pioneering. Like we took the Tinder interface, but we were applying it to a professional network. No one had done that before. It didn't matter that we were small at that stage or got big later. It's irrelevant. We were pioneering, full stop. And so we were having to solve problems that hadn't been solved before. Like we knew we could build ads that looked like the profile, but we didn't know how to onboard clients with ease if we were going to do it manually like that. And we couldn't stop other people just doing it for free. We didn't have a menu where people could control the subscription options or cancel a subscription, things like that. So there was like a fundamental requirement to go back and actually build a very different platform. And we did that. So we ran out of money, basically. Like we got to the end of our runway. I think it was late 2018 from memory. And we used that time to cry, and also we used it to draw up a blueprint for what a waterfall version of what we would do better and what we would do differently if we could start from scratch. And that was the best use of our time because we ended up raising the money to make that very thing, and we built that version of the app. And that replaced the initial two versions of Vampr that were in the market for nearly 5 years.
Oh, that's nice. And now you've built this app, it's in the market, it's thriving, and then you decide to sell it. What was the thinking behind that, and what was the decision? What was that internal conversation like with regards to like, it's time to let it go?
Well, we ran out of money again. So we ran out of money like 3 times, I think. Not because we were poor capital managers, but ultimately, in fact, we were incredibly thrifty. In the entire lifespan of Vampr as a private company, we made the decision to sell because in 2022, after the sort of tech boom in 2021, most private company valuations re-rated substantially, and we had just raised money. We were staring down the barrel of, a valuation closer to 5. And that was such a haircut that my board wasn't really willing to accept that. And so the options were find someone to buy us out, then we don't want to go through the process of watching you grow a second time. And, it's a pretty hard thing to hear as a founder and a pretty serious burden put on, to sort of solve that. But like I think I have a knack for as I turned sort of lemons into lemonade, and we found a scenario where we took a lot of equity in an Australian public company to sort of sell our products into that business and then ultimately take over that business and run it. And so we sold it, and then the next day we moved our boxes in and we started running it.
And you're touching on this notion of you selling this company, and now you are operating the parent company that's kind of bought you. Now you're the CEO of this company.
Yeah.
What was that transition like for you?
Fast and swift. It was just being a CEO of a public company has just a very different set of responsibilities than being the founder CEO of a private business. I probably was a little bit better primed than the next person, because in America, where Vampr had been located until we sold it, we'd done some crowdfunding rounds, and we'd been so successful in how many people we'd brought on and how much we'd raised back then. Now you can raise 50 million, but back then there was, I think, caps of like $1 million. So we'd exceeded some of the caps and the amount of people, and we had to report almost like a public business. So we had to file things with the SEC a couple times a year. We had to do audits, stuff that public companies go through. I had that experience as a private business in America. So I was probably primed for it a little bit better than the next person, but it was still a huge jump. Like there's no two ways about it. The knowledge gap was tremendous, and I had to upskill extremely fast. And I think I'm pretty good at it now, but it took a minute to get there.
Was it such a shift from owning a company from now operating?
I think the biggest shift was we then switched into an acquisition mode, and we bought like 5 or 6 companies in like 18 months. 6, I think, if you include mine. And being in a part of that many transactions in quite a short window is a lot, whether you're Apple or us. That's a lot of acquisitions in a short amount of time. And bringing in cultures, integrating them, integrating teams, integrating values, integrating financial systems, integrating technologies. I don't think anyone would have prepared me for just how hands-on you needed to be in order to not screw that up. Because anyone can buy a business. Like anyone with money can buy a business, but not screwing it up is really hard.
Yeah, this is true, because now you're acquiring different cultures. You are taking in new employees from different businesses with different cultures. Now you have to put a culture around that forms one company. And how did that work for you? And also, are you kind of building a company that looks to create everywhere within the music industry? Is that the idea behind the acquisition strategy? Because you've acquired a social media network, an events business within the music industry. Is that the idea behind the acquisitions, where you want to have your hands in all the cookie jars within the music industry?
Yeah, I'll bring it full circle to where we kind of started about like my values and what gets me excited, because that there's sort of, let's call it, the music industry is a pie. And like in the last few years, about half of that pie is the major labels, and then, the other half is everyone else. But that everyone else half of the pie is actually like 51% and growing. And a few years ago, it was like 43%. And so that growing side of the pie, I felt that was growing my whole career, because I've been on both sides of that equation. So I've got a pretty unique perspective on how that shift was happening. I've always believed in strength in numbers. I love when humans come together. I truly believe when humans come together, great things happen. I would love to, and I'm now a part of, so not would love to, I love leading that side that's sort of everyone else. It's like, it's less Hollywood, it's less fame and glamour, and it's harder work. And it's actually probably on a superficial level less rewarding, because a lot more people are involved, and that means a lot more people subsequently don't really like you, or think what you're doing is wrong, or don't like your products, or would do everything. I've got to deal with millions of people's opinions, versus like if I was running a label, I might have 50 artists that are on an active roster, and it's just a lot less people. So there's a lot more people on this side, which is good and tough, but this side lacked leadership. And financially, there's a huge opportunity there. I think holistically, there's a real opportunity there to leave the industry in a better shape over the course of my life, in better shape than it was when I came into this world.
And we've touched on this in terms of the difficulties of creating music when you started, and how tech has kind of helped make it way easier to distribute. And get music out there. Where do you see major labels being players in the next 20 to 30 years? As a music label, is your goal now shifting to finding the artists that's kind of popping online and bringing them in and being like a VC firm?
That model is really interesting to me. I've spent a lot of time researching it and meeting players in the financial services for artist space, where not just the catalog players, because that applies really only to more experienced and well-known people, but like I've spent a lot of time looking into music advances for early stage artists and analytics tools that identify the next potential superstars. I find that space compelling. We're not going to get into it, or I think it's very unlikely for us to directly get into it. We might do partnerships with other companies. In fact, coincidentally, I came from a meeting tonight about maybe doing a deal that will bring those services to our Vampr users. But I don't see us at this stage getting directly into the financial services. It's a little bit outside of our remit and our capabilities. That said, what's to say we don't buy a business in the future that's good at it? I just think it's not in our current core competencies. But look, for me, when I look at the suite of products that we operate, and even we have an investor, Songtrader, and some of the companies that they operate, I think we've got a similar approach here, is that we sort of believe in getting the many involved in using the products, and there's various things that we can provide a value to the many that keep them coming back. And so in Songtrader's case, it's Bandcamp. In our case, it's Vampr, and we're trying to build obviously another platform now with vinyl.com. But that our play really, and our platforms really only work if it's a platform for all early stage and even later stage musicians. But I think the way you win in the space that we're working is you make things that are useful to those early stage musicians. And that's what we focus on. I think that's what we do best. Every time we've tried to go outside of that and try and make more sophisticated products to later stage professionals, they've not quite connected with the audience. And so the lesson I keep coming back to is I think we're really exceptionally good at attracting early stage folks. So let's keep making things that are useful to them.
And with AI being the talk of the town, do you see AI becoming a collaborator for an artist, or do you see it kind of replacing artists?
Man, if I was actively in the studio right now, I would be using it to write bass lines with me, spit out. One of the things I remember, like, for real, even like at the quite senior levels of writers' rooms I would work with in LA, I remember I did this session with Party Next Door one night, and the reason I was asked in, and I went in with another well-known producer who I won't say their name out of privacy, respect for them, but the reason we were called in is they had music, but they didn't have beats, and they just wanted someone to come in and make beats. I hate making beats. Like, I'm the opposite. So I was always the guy, especially in the hip hop rooms, I'd make the music, but I'd let some younger kid do the beat because I found it tedious. Now I can make the music and I can prompt, give me a beat that will fit this vibe, and I can say I want it to be this BPM and I want it to have no hi-hats, but I want it to be dark and this and that. I can prompt that. That to me is amazing. So using it as a bandmate, I think that's a game changer. And yes, there's issues around rights and how did it learn how to interpret your prompts and all of that. And I think there's a lot of people putting their minds together to solve that. But let's take it as it's going to get resolved, because technology and music don't exist without the other. And historically, it's always been resolved. So I don't really worry about that. I I see it as a net positive as a creation assistant. But I think I personally can't picture myself actively seeking out fully AI generated music. It doesn't seem to be particularly appealing to me, but I also wouldn't be so naive to say I could never enjoy that, because who knows, who knows? So I don't know, but as an assistant, I think it's fucking awesome.
And you've touched on the idea of keeping updated with new trends. And as a tech CEO, how do you navigate that pressure of, this is what's happening, AI is where I need to be, this new shiny thing is in? As someone who's a CEO of a company, how do you focus yourself into this is where we need to be, this is the direction we need to follow as a company?
Well, as an individual tech adopter, I'm an early adopter. And that's that is very frustrating to my company, because it shouldn't be, and there's a cultural thing there that I need to work on. But I always want to incorporate new stuff when I play with it because I see opportunity. I love spotting opportunity. And with a lot of these things, first is often a powerful advantage, although it's not the be all end all. But it certainly, first is a trick. And if you can catch that wave, it's really powerful. We've missed a few for good reasons. Like we sat blockchain out quite consciously, but we partnered crucially with plenty of people who we thought were doing it right. So I've always taken the view of when these new things come out, I go and meet everyone. I meet the new founders. I meet the next generation of kids who are building great things. And one of the good side, I guess, one of the byproducts of having a company that gets frustrated with me being an early adopter is if there's no room in the roadmap to throw in, or flirt with the new technology, I won't just sit there and be frustrated. I'll go off and meet these other people instead. And then what that allows us to do is interesting, whether it's affiliate relationships or really light touch integrations. We get to test the technology without spending millions of dollars in R&D. And that's really been fantastic for us over the years because, I'm glad we didn't go all in on blockchain when we could have. And instead we did some really progressive integrations, but ones that we were able to get out of if we needed to. And I would say the same thing is happening with AI. I would love to throw 100 million. I'd love to throw a few, AI features into all of our products. And to be fair, actually at this point, there's quite a few AI things happening behind the scenes on all of our platforms now. But we don't have like make me a song feature inside of Vampr yet. But if I was still completely just focused on Vampr, maybe there would be.
Now, to kind of end our conversation, I want to can you distill your experience for us from the rock band frontman to the tech founder to the CEO? If I was a musician in my early days, I have this great idea. I'm ready to take the leap. What's that piece of advice you would offer to someone in that stage of their career?
Tech or music tech?
Let's just broaden and say both.
Okay. Yeah, because I do get the privilege of meeting particularly music tech founders every week. A, I make time for it, and B, they seek me out. And sometimes, depending on the personality type, if the personality type has that kind of determination and I'm going to make this work at all costs, I'm always 1,000% supportive. There's others where I can see that they might just not exhibit some of those characteristics of a founder who can go the whole way. I try and find sometimes delicate ways of maybe suggesting that there's other technology plays that are less risky. Like music tech's extremely risky. All technology plays are risky. Any startup's risky, but music tech is particularly risky because it's a small market of customers. It's a small market of investors. So your odds of success are less than in other tech verticals. So I've become pretty good at sort of suggesting how folks might be able to reposition their energy and enthusiasm in maybe slightly larger markets. And again, that doesn't apply to everyone because there's certain founders that are just like, I'm building this, I'm, dogmatic about it and I'm going to get it done. It's like, fucking go for it. So it depends on the personality type. And also, like, who am I to judge who should do what? If people ask for my opinion, I'll give it, and otherwise I'll stay out of it.
And to end things off, if people want to reach out to you, where do they find you?
Probably LinkedIn is the platform that I use the most. So yeah, just search my name on LinkedIn. And then I've got a website with a promotional photo of me in a suit, which happens about once every 12 months.
Well, with that, Josh, thanks for being on the show. And that is it from us.